This video is going to be on Spire Global, ticker symbol SPIR. They just released earnings last Wednesday on the 13th. I'm just going to be going over the transcript, going over the earnings call. It was a pretty solid earnings call. I actually really liked it. I'd give it probably an A, maybe an A minus, but I thought it was really solid and it does show growth. It does show execution. So let's talk about it. So let's just go over the summary first. So Q1 2026, they had revenue of $15.8 million, exceeding the high end of their guidance, and with core revenue rising 13% year over year. I'm expecting this to get to start rising faster, just because right now they're still in the build out phase, right? So Spire Global has to create a lot of satellites, create a lot of their hardware, and put it and launch it into space before they can get that data, right? Before they start getting data. Once that hardware and once those satellites are launched into space, then it'll be a lot faster getting more customers that are using their data, and then you'll see more of a SaaS-like revenue. And in my opinion, you'll see that S curve you'll see that S curve. Right now, we're kind of on the bottom of the curve where there's still a lot of build out, there's still a lot of research, all that stuff. Once everything is launched, then they don't have to launch more satellites to collect the same type of data. They'll only have to launch satellites when they're collecting new types of data or doing something new with their satellites. They maintain a 50% full year growth guidance and reserved satellite launch capacity through 2028. I think management also talks about later in the earnings call that this is actually like a mini moat, because it is pretty difficult apparently to reserve this capacity for launch, right? So like if there's other satellite companies or the new satellite companies, there is a limited capacity to how many rockets are going into space. So this is like a mini moat. I don't really care that much for this moat. Like I count this as more or less insignificant, but it is something to keep track of. Company remains debt-free with a strong cash position bolstered by a recent $65.5 million private placement. This I think is pretty good, right? So I think they're at around like probably like $120, $130 million of cash in the bank. And that's really important to have in a high interest rate environment. You have to remember that interest rate cuts are no longer on the table, or at least they're not expected, right? Unless there's some type of black swan event, they're not expected. So smaller companies, especially just Spire Global size, a lot of the companies, a lot of the competitors will have a high debt ratio because there's a lot of build out, there's a lot of research and development, and you don't have those revenue streams in place yet. So Spire Global does have that above their competition, or a lot of their competition. Spire Global plans to shift from quarterly to annual guidance due to a nature of large government and enterprise contracts, focusing on execution rather than pipeline. So that's just kind of telling you how they're changing their forecasting and how they're doing their earnings cost. Management highlighted strategic expansion in Europe with a new manufacturing facility in Munich, positioning the company favorably for European defense contracts. This is massive. Again, increased military spend, increased defense budget from Germany, France, the UK, almost all the NATO members. This is really big. This isn't saying that that the US isn't spending as much either, right? The US is spending as much or even more, right? Trump just had that $1.5 trillion increased budget proposal for the Department of Defense, or Department of War now. And also, not in this earnings call as well, but I also wanted to mention that the CEO and the CFO, Ali and Teresa, they just sound a lot more confident compared to previous earnings calls, right? They recently became CEO and CFO, I want to say 2, 3, or 4 quarters ago. And back then they were saying a lot of uhs, they were saying a lot of ums. Now they seem a lot more confident, and I really do appreciate that. It's a lot easier to stand behind them and be confident in management. Moving on, here's Teresa talking about core revenues excluding maritime grew 13% year over year. Remember that they sold maritime for $250 million. Our 50% full year growth guidance is unchanged. We described 2026 as second half weighted. This is what I'm saying when I said that S curve. You have a lot of build out, you have a lot of research and development, you have a lot of launching, right? So that's this lower part of the S curve, and then soon when you get to the second half, when things start getting launched, revenue starts coming in, that's when you start seeing that launch curve. That's when you start seeing that like type of ramp up in revenue, ramp up in growth, ramp up in customers. Peer growth group is increasing, being throttled by access to launch. This is when I was talking about how there's the reserved launch capacity of 2028. I don't really care that much. It's like a semi-moat, I guess. But as more companies see that companies like Rocket Lab or SpaceX, they're doing good, then you will see more, you'll see the market grow, or not the market. You'll see competitors to companies like Rocket Lab, to SpaceX grow, and then this type of mini moat might disappear. We have operational scaled transatlantic manufacturing with production facilities in the US, Europe, and the UK. This means that transatlantic manufacturing, tariff agnostic, right? Everyone's flipping crap because tariffs are going to make everything expensive. Guess what? Spire Global has multiple manufacturing sites, so they're not beholden to Trump's crazy tariffs. So even if Trump has a lot of tariffs, well, then Spire Global just won't have the manufacturing for the satellites in their American companies. I think it's in, I want to say Pennsylvania. I might be getting it mixed up, but it's politic agnostic, it's tariff agnostic, and I think that this is the big moat that I want to talk about. Like, this is a really big moat that I think a lot of people are kind of glancing over. We are observing increased recognition that pure play scaled multi-domain RF intelligence is a strategic, scarce, and durable category that is consistent with what we hear from customers. They are no longer asking whether commercial RF makes sense. They are asking who can deliver at scale with verified on-orbit performance and with sovereign-ready manufacturing. This is basically saying our TAM is growing and people are recognizing the importance of RF intelligence. This was part of my thesis, right? Their data is going to be very valuable for defense, for agriculture, for aviation, for all these things, right? Even for trading. It'll be important for weather. We deployed 19 satellites across 2 launches, which expanded our RFGL collection capacity by 6 new satellite pairings. So this is what I'm saying by, first of all, the S-curve, and second of all, it's the first mover's advantage becoming a durable competitive moat. As the first mover, then you're gonna have the bulk of the first customers. When you create those satellites for those first customers, then those satellites are now in space. Now, because you have this data, right, and other people are still building this data, you don't have to do anything, and then you get customers. You get more customers, then you get more satellites. When you get more satellites, you have better data, and that attracts more customers, and then more customers that need more novel data. And then when those customers need more novel data, then you're creating more satellites that create even better and more data, right? And it's kind of just this flywheel of getting more satellites to more data, to more customers, to more satellites, to more data, to more customers. Our new hyperspectral microwave sounder achieved first flight, which basically just means it started getting data with the demonstrator and is now delivering data to our end user customer. On-orbit observations are meeting and in many cases exceeding our technical targets. So that means that their data is working, right? So they are getting their revenue, because Spire Global will only start getting revenue when they're delivering data, which is, I think, really important, because it's kind of like having your foot in the door. You're saying, let's work together, and then we'll create the satellite for free, and then we'll only charge you if you like the data. I think that this is really important because it establishes a level of trust that customers that you're not working with, new customers that you're working with, don't have established yet, right? So then once you're basically saying, here's a sample, and if you like it, then you can take it, right? If you don't like it, well, we messed up. So this is kind of your foot in the door. It's a sales technique, or it's a way to influence to get people to at least join, quote unquote, risk-free, which it is risk-free for their new customers. What did I write? High barrier of entry, annual recurring revenue. This is, oh, okay. Also, a new customer had asked for this hyperspectral microwave sounder satellite. This new customer, it costs money, it costs R&D to create the satellite. However, any other customer that might want a similar type of data or the same type of data, that customer being onboarded will be almost free, because you already have the satellites in orbit working, right? You don't have to rebuild another satellite. You just have to kind of give data. First of all, it's data going to one customer. Now it's the same data going to 2 customers. So this is that high barrier of entry that will eventually lead to SaaS-like or software as a service-like margins, in my opinion. New commercial contract duration has lengthened, with some wins moving into multi-year subscriptions. So this is when I was talking about how Spire Global has this pilot phase or this testing phase, and then after they either win or they completed their testing phase and pilot phase, and then their customers like their data or like what they're doing, then they'll either extend their contract or they'll give them better contracts, right? So this is what that's talking about, and it's showing you that Spire Global is executing, right? Because Spire Global is winning, right? You wouldn't go to multi-year subscriptions. They wouldn't lengthen your contract duration if they don't like your data, if you're not executing well enough. The commercial base is becoming stickier and more compounding. This again, because because Spire Global's data is important. A lot of companies use Spire Global's data specifically for their work, for their product. It just means that Spire Global has this type of pricing power. Those customers will stay around because your data is needed, right? For example, this Amadeus supporting their service to more than 400 airlines globally. Well, they're not going to create their own satellite and do the research and development to get this data. Spire Global already has that, right? And then so companies like Amadeus that need to do something similar, they can also become customers of Spire Global. By being a business of scale, Spire Global will either get a higher margin or they're able to lower their margin in order to compete with other new players on the field. The post Q1 catalysts that should be on every investor's mind radar are concrete and dated. They have their catalysts in place, right? So like there's nothing that's kind of in the air. So I guess all of 2026 revenue, this is what Spire Global said. So all of 2026 revenue, I don't, it's probably later down in the transcript, but all of 2026 revenue is already basically accounted for, and it just depends on execution. So unless Spire Global kind of screws up somewhere, which I guess that's the bear case for all companies, right? So unless Spire Global messes up somewhere, knock on wood, they should be able to make their guidance. So we are actively bidding for, this is pretty cool. We are actively bidding more than 100 fit categories, 7 data types, 4 of which Spire can deliver infrastructure already on orbit. This again goes back to what I was saying. Because Spire Global already has their satellites in space, they don't have to go through the R&D, they can just start bidding for contracts. There's 3 more different types of data type that Spire Global might want to deal with, or maybe they don't want to deal with it, right? Because sometimes, for example, NOAA, they might be using watching satellites or like looking satellites, which are more just pictures rather than RF frequency. So maybe they don't even want to deal with the other 3 data types. But if they do want to, then they only have to focus on 3 other different data types rather than the 4 that they already have orbiting in space and just collecting data. Like these are basically just free contracts, and they can just throw their bid in and see what bites, right? It's like fishing. You don't have to do anything. You just sit there and see if anything bites. Next thing, this is talking about how there is a increased TAM and how European defense budget is increasing. He talks about Germany, she talks about Europe in general. Additional RFGL collections capacity continues to come online with the Q1 launches with full operational status reached through Q2 and Q3. So this is again the ramping up of Spire Global's business, right? You're still doing R&D, you're still creating more satellites, you're still doing launching, right? There's no data, there's no revenue in this part of Spire Global. As soon as they start becoming online, you'll see this rampant increase in revenue, in customers, in all those, in data collection. And data is so important. I keep harping on this point because I think that data is going to be the gold mine. Unlike infrastructure, unlike memory, is it really dark? It is okay, it is really dark, but it's fine. Unlike infrastructure, unlike memory, unlike all those things, they're not a one-time fee. It's a subscription-based business model. You'll be needing data throughout your entire business. So that's again one of the reasons why I'm bullish on Spire Global. More than 90% of national weather service model accuracy depends on satellite data. Talking about increased mode, talking about the importance of their data, talking about execution. Satellites cost billions of dollars per generation to procure. NOAA. Okay, so this is also talking about how after Trump became president, a lot of government agencies started to stop building things in-house and started to offload their hardware creation or their tasks to private companies. So this does show you that Spire Global, again, their TAM is increasing because now you have this more of the US government depending on more private companies, right? And Spire Global can be one of those companies that bid for those projects. Again, it isn't economical for every single company to research. This is the thesis of the economies of scale. You have one person or you have a few companies that specialize in whatever their thing is, and then everyone else goes to them. That's literally the thesis of economies of scale. Our service becomes core to their business. Yeah, again, economies of scale, right? Pricing power. They have it, right? They have it. As long as they don't screw over the customer or they don't create or they don't do something that makes the customers distrust them, then those customers will stay. Those customers will remain sticky. Everything depends on execution, right? First, the year's revenue base is now substantially in execution, not pipeline. No longer in R&D/manufacturing phase for most 2026 revenue. The operating leverage you have been hearing about for several quarters is about to become visible in the gross margin line. Expansion of margin. Big. This is big, right? Because right now they're at a 44% gross margin, and they expect for it to grow to around 60 to 70% margin. Those are wide SaaS-like margins. I keep talking about SaaS-like margins. This part's kind of bearish. This part I don't really like that much. So this is talking about how there's still going to be a lot of professional and legal fees that they have from selling capital. it just, again, still more, right? $26.2 million of operating cash flow. We use that much in the first quarter. That is substantial, and that's not something I like too much. But I guess it is a good thing that they were able to raise $65.5 million in Q1. So we exited first quarter with approximately $50 million in cash. So now they have about $115 million of cash on hand. That's good because it offers you a buffer for a growing company, especially in a high rate environment. We expect our current cash position to fund us through adjusted EBITDA break even and beyond. That's good, right? And they're also expecting cash even break even to be sometime between Q4 and Q1 2027. Okay, so the capital raise was in response in part to a discrete window of strong inbound demand from institutional investors. I low-key think that this was some institutional investors being worried that they were getting short squeezed when the stock randomly went up from like $10 or $8 to $23. So I think this was them kind of using that opportunity because a lot of people needed, or because those institutional investors were worried that they were going to get short squeezed. And as a company, you want the institutional investors on your side, right? Because those people are going to help once they have your stock, right? They're going to want to help basically show your company. They want to help promote your company. So I think that, and this is also good, right? Because it brings you up from $50 million cash on hand to now $150 million cash on hand. Makes you a lot stronger and a lot more durable of a company. A non-GAAP operating loss and adjusted EBITDA revenue remains expected in the 75 to 85 million, representing 50% year-over-year growth. This is talking about their change in guidance, which we saw in the summary. This is my favorite sentence because this is my entire thesis. Our cost basis is increasingly fixed, right? Fixed cost base, one-time fee, high barrier of entry, right? Satellites are on orbit, the ground infrastructure is built, transatlantic manufacturing is operational, and engineering teams are in place with reasonable bounds. This entire thing is just saying our business has a very high barrier of entry. We already passed that high barrier of entry, and now it's all about execution. Every pipeline conversion accelerates our cash flow goals. Every new customer that goes online, every pipeline that's complete and goes from being a pilot / testing phase to being launched to then collecting data. As soon as it starts collecting data, it starts to accelerate their cash flow goals. Continue to add to the contract that we have with them. Continue to go from pilot to data subscription. Oh, someone says, oh, do we think you only have, it sounds like you are able to produce 100 satellites. And then Teresa says, now we're able to produce 300 to 400 satellite capacity across those facilities. You can produce more, you can work on multiple pipelines all in parallel, and they can go up in space faster. And this is actually pretty cool. It talks about how Hawkeye, they just IPO'd, and they do something similar. Also, subscription model data as a service. So this is just AI, right? So take this with a grain of salt. But then Hawkeye focuses heavily on uncooperative signals. They hunt for radio, radar, and emergency beacons from targets that might be trying to stay hidden. Versus Spire Global, they're just doing like a more broad search, right? So it's like looking for weather data, looking more for things that are just there and out in the open. So those are the two different things. Again, this relates back to the blue ocean strategy. So it's good that they're working on two different things so that they're not competing with each other directly. Although they do work in similar space, it's not directly competing with each other. But another thing is this is now good for retail investors because now you can see how Spire Global is executing according or compared to one of their peers, specifically compared to someone that works really similarly in a similar technology and also very similar field, even though they might be targeting different different companies or different countries or different tasks. You can still see a slight similarity and still do some type of comparison, which I think is actually net positive for just retail traders and doing your research, doing your DD. This thing is also kind of like a warning that I do want to note to everyone. I keep talking about how Europe is increasing their spending and increasing their budget, but they are doing it slower, right? And the timeline from going to pilot to data subscription is very much dependent on the country, on their procurement mechanism and their timeliness or timelines of things. Some countries like Germany or France that are actively like sometimes even going against or yeah, sometimes going against what Trump is saying, they might be going faster than usual because they see some type of like splinter between US and NATO members. But other companies might, or other countries, they might not care that much, and that might be a lot slower. So this is almost like a mini warning that I want to put on everyone's radar, that Europe is going slower, and we'll look to see at what contracts that they have with European countries, and also we'll look at Q2 earnings to see whether or not they start ramping up things, or whether or not Europe is just slower than America usually, which is quite surprising. I can't emphasize how different this is from where NOAA was in prior years, talking about how 150 million of stuff that is in the year between the various data types RO, as well as multiple related microwave soundings. So NOAA is starting to look for more private companies to do more things. We already know how to build these at scale, right? Decreased R&D, faster ship time, and the geopolitical situation continues to change. That's exactly where Spire Global shines. Again, part of my thesis, $5.8 million of legal fees. Holy shit. Still, dude, this legal system in America is dog shit. It's just a reason to pay lawyers and judges. Already talked about that. And yeah, so that is Spire Global's earnings in a nutshell. How long was this video? Oh, it's really dark. Hold a second. Just I guess TLDR, too long didn't watch. Spire Global's this quarter for Q1 2026, I think that it was really solid earnings, right? It was really solid earnings call. Management seemed really confident. There was a lot of tailwinds that were pushing Spire Global, right? Just especially Trump in general, Trump in himself is just a massive tailwind. So I'm still really bullish on the company. I think right now, especially after the recent pump on Friday, that is something to note, right? On Friday, every stock dropped except for Spire Global. You could say almost, probably like 90% of the stock market was red or flat. Spire Global was up like 10%. So that is something to take note of. And I think that's probably a short squeeze or just shorts covering. That is some type of buying pressure that we can take note of. We have a lot of tailwinds. Spire Global is finally starting to ramp up into that S-curve, into the more vertical part of the S-curve, hopefully, is what I'm seeing. And I'm just really bullish on the company. As for valuation, I think that right now it is priced pretty well, right? I think that if I didn't have a position, I would be looking at it and looking for any potential dip. But because I have a position, I'm probably not gonna buy any more. And if it does spike up like a few dollars more, I might start selling covered calls. That's just where I'm right now, just because I've been holding this since like 6, 7, 8, right? So I need to earn money somehow, right? Other than that, super bullish. I think that the future is really bright. I think that as long as Spire Global keeps executing, management keeps doing what they're saying, right? And they keep firing on all cylinders, which they are, I'm super bullish. I think the future has a lot of opportunity for Spire Global to grow into, and AI, agriculture, defense, all these things are just potential markets that Spire Global can enter or have already entered. So yeah, that's this video on Spire Global. Ticker symbol SPIR. Have a good day. Peace. Bye.